Morning, everybody. Welcome. It's a very important topic that we're going to be covering again today. Last week, we had one of the most popular sessions we've had since we started this. And by the looks of the interest on the video, it certainly is going to be something that is going to be of value going forward. And very pleased that Arno Barnard is going to take us through that. Arno has got a background as a quantity surveyor and is working in the engineering management branch at the City of Cape Town. We're very, very grateful to the City of Cape Town, the people that Arno works with, that they have allowed him to share this with us. And without any further ado, Arno, welcome. Your laser pointer's working, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Welcome.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sean. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all dry, warm-ish, and comfortable. Obviously, the Western Cape is experiencing a bit of winter. I think the first traditional, old-fashioned Cape Town, Western Cape winter in a number of years. So. Although we're grateful for what it's doing to our dams, we are a little bit sorry for ourselves. It's been a while since we've seen the sun. So yes, thank you very much, Sean. Thank you for the opportunity. I had great fun with the team last week, and we're going to continue our journey today. So I don't know, quite often when we present this content to our colleagues at the city, it's sort of a mixed bag. Sometimes the folk found that which we did last week as the confusing bit, and other times they find what we're going to do today as the confusing bit. So I think today's got a few more buts and ifs and complexities in it. So yeah, I think it's important for me that by the time we've concluded the session today, that everyone's sort of clear. So ask your questions. You know, when you present something in your head, the way you present it makes absolutely sense, that it is absolutely clear. But sometimes we don't express ourselves in a manner that everyone understands equally. So please, if there is any specific issue, let's flag it, let's deal with it in questions. I will try and find another way to explain it, maybe use a different example, etc. So where last week we determined whether we discussed whether a procurement activity should be procured as a construction contract in terms of the CIDB Act and regulations. Today, we're moving forward from that position. We've got to the point where it is now clear, after having done the step-by-step of last week, that we are dealing with a construction contract. And today, we want to then move forward. Now, nothing wants to move forward. Okay, so yeah, so today is guidance on the determination of the contractor grading designation requirements and, importantly, how to evaluate them. There is a little bit of a step in between that's not always so easy to understand. So the bulk of the time we're going to spend today is on how to determine the contractor grading designation, and then towards the back end, how we're going to evaluate those things. So again, we're coming out of a space where CIDB's got a whole lot of documentations in place. I think as we shared last week, I spent a lot of time in the practice notes. We've got some examples on the screen here about practice notes that are specifically applicable to the topic at hand today. So again, one of the key functions of CIDB in terms of the Act is to establish and maintain this contractor grading designation system, which is what we're going to be chatting about. And it's a conglomeration of some numbers, some lettering, and they each mean something specific. So the little picture in black that you see on the left-hand side of the screen, I forget that I've got a shiny bug that I can direct you this week. And that's typically how you would see designations developed in tender documents, in adverts, etc. Now, each of these elements means something specifically. The numerical value, the first portion of it, ranges from 1 to 9, and it's an indication of the contractor's capability to undertake work within a specified tender value range. beyond the scope of this section or what we're going to discuss today, but it's also important for you as practitioners to sort of come to grips in terms of what it takes for a contractor to convince CIDB to give them a specific designation. CIDB tests the turnover over a predetermined period of time, the largest specific project over a period of time. They also look at some of the financial issues of a contractor, cash on hand and capital and that kind of stuff. So those are the method or the methods, the requirements that CIDB sets upon bidders when they apply for specific grading. What is interesting to note, and which we're grappling with in our organization quite a bit at the moment, when you look at, for instance, the largest project that a contractor is required, the largest single project in a period of 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, that a contractor is required to get a specific designation, it's a lot smaller than you think. So typically it's about, I think it's between 25 and 30% of the upper value of the grade that they've now been given. So a contractor that now perhaps been given work that he can do up to 10 million rand, typically for him to get that grading from CIDB, the single biggest project up to that point that he should have done is like 3 or 4 million. It's a lot less. So just be aware of that. I think sometimes we have the perception that for a contractor to work in a specific grading, they must already have done work in that grading value range. And obviously that is not the case. So that talks to the contractor, the numerical value. The 2-digit code, the 2-letter code signifies the class of construction works that's applicable to the tender that you're procuring. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at some examples of that today. The third one is the PE designation. It designates potentially emerging status. The benefit of what an employer can gain when they consider the PE designation is that you can allocate work in a next category. So somebody has on screen 5 CEPE, you could give work to them in a grade 6. However, please go and consult practice note 32 of that CIDB has published. The right or the privilege to utilize the PE designation by an employer comes with the responsibility of supporting those contractors through some sort of a contract development program. I think it has come to light recently that a lot of awards are being made to PE contractors without the support of a contractor development program in place. Obviously, that places your contractor at risk because you're pushing a contractor into a space where they should probably not be operating based on the criteria that CIDB set on grading, of which financial stability and financial capability is one. So it's understandable that access to the PE system needs to be accompanied by a level of contractor development, contractor support. All right. So let's play with the table. Let's look at the value ranges first. So this is a table published with the ranges. For some reason, the table that we found on the CIDB website doesn't have the value range of 1. So obviously, work between 30,000 and 1 million is graded now as a 1, if I'm not mistaken. I think this is the latest table. But we're going to play with this table. If it's not 100% correct, please forgive me, but the principles that we're going to share with you remains the same. You'll find the table in the regs and the latest government gazettes. So let's do a tender value for 2.5 million rand must be advertised at grade 3. I think we can all see that the 2.5 million sits in this category. It's above 1 million. It's below 3 million, so it quite comfortably sits in at a level 3. Our next one is a tender of 5.9 million. Again, comfortably, we can see it sits above the 3 million, below the 6 million. It sits into that category. Easy enough to determine that grading range. And here's the first but of the day. So CIDB Reg 25.3 basically says when your tender estimate is in the first 20% of a new value range, you should be advertising at the previous value range. The wording out of the out of the regs, let me read that for clarity, just to make sure it's not my language that makes a mistake. Where identification of a tender value range is based on the estimated tender value, that sentence then carries on by saying where that estimate is within 20% of the lower limit of that tender value range, the tender value range immediately below that tender is the one at which you must advertise. So a tender for 7 million bucks. So logically, we'll say 7 million rand sits between 6 and 10 million. If we apply regulation 25.3, 20% onto 6 million is 7.2 million. So in terms of this regulation, and tender estimated at 7 million rand should not be advertised at 5. It should in fact be advertised at 4. This is normally one of the first sort of stumbling blocks when we do these presentations. So I don't have sight of the chat. So keep on posting your questions there, Sean. If you feel at any point we need to stop and deal with questions in the chat, please shout at me.
Sure.
Okay, so relatively simple except for one but. So in the CIDB Standards for Uniformity, they published Annexure G, and this is where the devil is hidden. This is the detail which we don't always understand or appreciate. I stuck them all onto one slide. Please don't worry, we're going to deal with each of these things individually, but this is what the annexure looks like. It's in this content where the crux and the nuggets lie about which works category is going to be applicable. And it is, we find that probably about 70% of folk who procure construction, they've only read the first 2 columns. They've said, oh, civil engineering, yeah, the acronym, yeah, the abbreviation CE makes sense. But it's in the last 3 columns where all the details are hidden, and then similarly with the specialist classes, the devil is in that detail. So let's go into those specific classes. So the first one is the civil engineering works. We've got a few pictures of a nice big bridge, some culverts, road culverts, some road construction, some form of a reservoir or a tank in a wastewater treatment works. We've got a sewer system, bottom left, and we have a swimming pool with a grandstand, bottom right. Who would have thought that swimming pools and grandstands is civil engineering? Well, it says so in this document. So this is just a larger extract of Annexure G, and here it talks to swimming pool, and I think somewhere I saw grandstands in here also. So again, it's important that we look at these things. So how these tables works, it's sort of a brief description of what the works category is about. And here we say construction. C is for works that is materials such as steel, concrete, earth, rock, and the application, etc. In terms of fixed assets and the discussions that we heard last week. Then they go into some examples, some work. The services that you could impact is water, sewerage, roads, railways, harbors, transport, urban development, and municipal services. And then it goes again into some greater detail. Colleagues, it's important that we look at the whole lot, all 3 columns put together. Sometimes when you've got your specific tender, it becomes obvious when you look at the very first column, but sometimes it needs you to go a little bit deeper into the development, into the content that you see here. Pictures help. I think it's one of the challenges for those of you who work in the CE works category. It is one of the broadest works categories in the CIDB register of contractors. CE and ME are probably the 2 broadest. So you can just see by virtue of the pictures, it's from road building to water mains, to sewer mains, to building swimming pools, to working underground, to doing reservoirs, etc. So be very mindful of CE is an incredibly broad class of work. And we'll look at ME also. Okay. One of the ones that causes a lot of confusion is the distinction between EP and EB. So EP is electrical infrastructure works. I've got a little sketch at the top, a little diagram, which is quite nicely indicative of the distinction between EP and EB. So EP is everything from where we burn the coal all the way through our distribution network, through our substations, through our network into our suburbs, into our areas, up to and including the point of supply. So again, it's a little bit of an older sketch where it's overhead lines, etc. So in the sketch or the diagram, all the way up to and including that last pole, together with the pole mounted transformer, will be EP, apologies, EP, apologies. From there into the property, from the point of supply into the property is EB. So some examples through the pictures. We've got a substation, bottom left. We've got some big cables being installed in the center. Apologies, I didn't see that there was branding on that slide. So some advertising for somebody. And then also in terms of the content up top here, we've got some area lighting. So if you look in the right-hand column, where the shining light is, substations and protection systems, power generation, it's those things. Township reticulation transmission lines is these things, and then also somewhere I see area lighting. I thought I saw, but this typically, so your big area lights, your municipal area lighting, will be part of the EB category.
Second line in the third column. Yeah.
There it is. Yeah. Thank you, Sean. Amazing how the pressure of presenting makes you go blindish. And I've specifically put this picture in because we want to distinguish that to an EB. So EB, it's the electrical inside the building. You can see as a little electrical layout of a building with showing lights and plugs and all those good things. Here's a slab where we can see the conduits being put in, ready for the pour. Here's the guy connecting a light fitting. But here's also area lighting. The distinction between this area lighting and what we saw on the previous slide is this is on the client side of the point of supply. So this is area lighting in a parking area. It looks like an airport or of some sort. So this kind of lighting for me is in the EB category because it happens downstream of the point of supply, whereas this one sits on that side. Yeah, and then at the bottom we've got the maze or the mess or the joy of an electrical distribution box. Never understood how they get the right wire in the right hole. Anyway, there it is. So EB is everything from generation up to that point into which the client, the user, connects into the electrical network. EB is everything downstream of that. I know we battle with this quite a bit, so I always go back to this diagram as my first step. Is where on the diagram is the stuff happening, and 98 times out of 100, this sorts me out. Just through the positioning of where on the diagram the electrical installation occurs. All right, so that's EB and EP. General building works. Yeah, the definitions have changed a little bit from when I first started using this annexure. At one point, it was saying general building works was where the structure or the facility that you're creating consists of multiple building elements, multiple different types of material, etc. So again, if we think back to that reservoir and that bridge, etc., that we saw in the CE category, that made sense to me because that's concrete and rebar. Whereas when you start looking at Moses Mabhida Stadium, that's concrete, rebar, brickwork, aluminium, electrical, mechanical installations, etc. What CIDB has done now in this iteration of it, it sort of changed it to saying it's construction works that are concerned with permanent shelter for its occupants or its contents. Not quite like that. I mean, this is a permanent shelter for the rugby supporters on the day of the event. This is a permanent shelter for the materials that are being warehoused in the store. This is a permanent shelter for the books and the uh, people using the library. This is the Dunoon Library in City of Cape Town, something we're incredibly proud of. So if you want to go and Google some photographs of a very radically sexy building, go and Google Dunoon Library. Similarly, this is an office complex, and likewise, here's a pump station, etc. So this pump station building would now be an interesting one when we compare with, is this now CE or is it EB? And I think with both definitions, if the building is a standalone project, I would probably argue that it is EB, because in the old methodology, where it consists of multiple different materials and elements, it's not just simply steel and concrete, but it's also, if we look at the new definition, it's a permanent shelter for the pumps and the pump equipment, etc., that goes with it. So I would argue very hard that that would also be an EB works category. It's a little bit beyond the CE. However, if that building becomes part of a bigger project, it could be different, and we'll talk to that at one of the final slides in the presentation. All right, so that's EB. Mechanical engineering, again, as I said earlier, incredibly broad, a range of activities, range of construction activities through that. It goes from air conditioning, HVAC system, bottom left, a pump system, pump piping system. I hope Garth is online. Garth, that picture is for you. We've got a little bit of a materials handling, materials transfer facility on the right. It's got some conveyors and those kinds of things. So even if you just look in the right-hand column of this of the mechanical engineering category, air conditioning, central heating, centralized hot water generation, cranes and hoists, you can see it is an incredibly broad spectrum of activities that falls into the ME category: kitchen equipment, laundry equipment, lifts, escalators, refrigerators, cold rooms. So it is important that you are aware of these two broad categories are the ones quite often where we slip up. We think something may fit into something else, where it's been very broadly described into these categories. So yeah, I think that's what I would like to say on ME category. Then we start moving into the S categories, the specialized classes of work, which CIDB is identified. So there's always an interesting dynamic when we look at the specialist classes. So let's consider the SC class, which is basically bulk excavations and earth retaining kind of structures. So if your project separates the basement excavation and the retaining walls and all the good things as you see on the picture from the main structure, if it's a standalone contract to do SC, this type of work, you will procure it under the SC category. However, if the basement excavation and the lateral support and the retaining walls is part of your overall bigger construction project, you will procure this work as GB. GB being general building, and typically this kind of work would be a subcontractor to the general building trades. So it's important to understand that when you look at the project as a whole. So if the project as a whole is the 20-story building together with the three level basement, it would be, all of the work would be procured as GB. If your project is the construction of the basement, or the digging of the hole and the retaining of the basement as a standalone contract, the rest being done later stage, the basement and the retaining walls will be done as C. So I've dabbled a lot there. That didn't confuse you, but you're going to find that with all of the specialist classes, they quite often fit also into the bigger picture. And when it fits into the bigger picture, we'll see right at the end what we do with when there's more than one class of work that describes the nature of the contract. it would roll up into the bigger picture grading. But if it's a standalone contract, it would go into the specialist categories. I hope I've explained that well. So SC, as we said, it's digging the hole, keeping the rest of the world out through collapsing into the hole with retaining structures and earth stabilization, etc. SE is demolition. Again, here's, by the looks of it, somebody who built a house without the right approved plans, and it's being demolished. So again, similarly, if the nature of your project plan is that you're going to do demolitions as a first project in a standalone manner, and then you will do earthworks, and then you will do the buildings, each of those are standalone contracts, and you would need to apply the relevant works category to each of those things. So SE is then demolition of buildings and structure and blasting and all these good things. SF is fire detection, fire protection. So the two pictures you've got is a sprinkler system, a fire protection system to the left, and on the right is the diagram of a fire detection system. So again, when you are retrofitting a building with smoke detection or fire protection, you would then target the SF works category class. SG is curtain walls, shop fronts. So last week we had a question, Sean, if you recall, about somebody who said, what must they do with a project that has the removal of roller shutter doors and the replacement of those roller shutter doors with aluminium doors? Now that starts becoming a bit interesting because there's an element of that which you could probably argue goes into SG. The removal of the doors, you could probably argue, goes into demolition. Again, in that instance, one would look at the totality of the works project. What really is where the money lies? There additional repairs involved in it, etc., because it could be GB or SG in that instance. So that's aluminium works. On the right, we've got some landscaping and irrigation. Again, quite straightforward to understand, I think, other than the shock to realize there's actually a CIDB class of work for irrigation and landscaping. It does still surprise some folk at times. So be mindful of that grading. What I also said last week bears repeating now, CIDB are rightfully protective over their specialist classes. So honor the specialist classes. Unless you've got a very good reason, you may get yourself into some hot water if you're advertising a landscaping contract as a CE or a GB, because that's wherever you've come across it in the past. So we refer to the devil in the detail, and one of the devils in the detail of Annexure G is the realization of the specialist classes. And when your work is aligned to those classes, please bear them in mind. SI are lifts and escalators and anything to do with lifts and escalators. I think that's quite a straightforward one. SJ is piling and specialized foundations. So again, going back to our 20-story building example earlier, you could in fact have the piling installation being done under a contract, the basement excavation and retaining structures under a separate contract, and then the building work under a third contract. If that's your procurement strategy, you will then have to honor the specialist classes for piling, for lateral support and earthworks, and then for general building works. Typically, when we have those big buildings, it is all done in one under a main contract with various subcontractors, and if that is the case, it will all then again be done under GB. So SJ is piling and specialized foundations. SK is road markings and signage. Again, something that folk often are not aware of, that there is a specialist works category for signage, for road signage and road marking. I hope that we don't end up, I just had to bring this in. It's one of my favorite gag photographs out of construction. It's just how easy something can go wrong even with road marking.
That's not Cape Town, is it?
No, no, I'm hoping it's not. Exactly. I think that car's driving on the wrong side of the road for it to be Cape Town. I'm hoping it's in America, Sean. So again, colleagues, bear this in mind. Bear in mind the size of the contractors that you have in the space. Some specialist categories, we often find it quite difficult to get contractors of the right size. So what you need to be mindful of is that CIDB has only got the one value range table, 0 to 1 to 9. So you must be appreciative that a main contractor can reach a grade 9 a lot quicker than a road marking contractor, because the main contract of the road project may be 200 million rand, which gives him a grade 9 grading. But the road marking component of that could be 3 million rand. So, or 4 million rand, which is a much lower grading designation. So when you are procuring standalone road marking, and a lot of the other specialist grades also, specialist works categories, when you're procuring large value tenders for these specialist services, you may find you don't have appropriately graded contractors on the CIDB register of projects, register of contractors, purely because it takes a lot longer for a road marking contractor to reach grade 9 than it does for a main contractor. So keep that in mind when you, our protocol is whenever we go into the specialist classes and it does start getting to the upper end of the 6, 7, 8 kind of levels, we invariably turn to the register of contractors on the CIDB website and just see what is the size of the market in that space, just to be sure that we end up with a tender that is competitive, etc. So that's road marking. SL is structural steel work and scaffolding. A structural steel building going up on the left, and here we've got some extensive scaffolding around some sort of chimney stack. So the one on the right could also again be quite an interesting designation process to go through. Obviously, there's scaffolding. Obviously, there's probably some structural steel. There's some structural steel towards the back there. So just looking at this photograph, it could be quite clear that it may well be an SL project, SL works category. However, these chimney stacks or flues may be part of a larger mechanical and electrical engineering. So again, it could be in the big picture of it all, that overall it's an M&E project. However, again, if you are procuring just the scaffolding, you would do the scaffolding as an SL, or just the structural steel, you will do that as an SL. SN is specialized waterproofing systems to floors, basements, and walls. These guys are they're the one group of folk who love the rain in the Western Cape, because I think their phones are ringing off the hooks. All of our properties got subjected to some high pressure water testing in the last 2 weeks. So yeah, remember that when you are repairing flat roofs over your municipal facilities, there is the waterproofing specialist category, and it is SN. SO is plumbing. Little schematic of a plumbing installation to a house, from municipal connection point for water, municipal connection point for sewer. SO is everything inside of the site. You've got a guy who's fixing a trap to a basin or trying to repair a leak. It looks like there's some water dripping down there. All of that kind of work would be in the SO grading category, works category. Again, anything beyond that point, the infrastructure, the municipal services in your townships, typically that would fall within the CE works category range. So similarly to where we had that little sketch about the distinction between EP and EB, you can have a similar sketch for the distinction between CE and SO when it comes to water reticulation systems and sewer systems. Up to the point of connection, the site connection would be CE from the site connection point towards the the user facility would be SO. Fencing, yeah, precast concrete, steel fencing, there's a specialist category for SQ. Please go and have a look at CIDB practice note 20. It is completely descriptive of how you distinguish between SQ and GB, for instance, because some fences has got little brick walls. A brick fence is obviously not a precast or steel or precast concrete or steel fence. So in that practice note, it says that a SQ, it would typically be an SQ if the manufacturing of the products happens off-site, and it's steel panels or precast panels that arrive on site and essentially just get connected, bolted together on site. Whereas if your fence requires construction materials that must be brought onto site to cast foundations, build walls, etc., you would then rather that then GB would be applicable. So please go and have a look at this practice note. I still refer to this one quite often when it's those mixed kind of fences where you've got a bit of a brick wall at the bottom, and then you have a steel palisade fence on top. The practice note is very helpful in terms of guiding you how to decide which one is which. But by and large, these types of fence, these concrete palisades, the see-through security fencing, wire fencing, that kind of stuff would sit with the SQ works category. So, colleagues, that's all the works categories that we've gone through. There's a couple of few other things that we just need to talk to. We alluded to it earlier. So the CIDB reg says typically the instruction to us is you look at your scope of work and you select a single class of construction work that best describes the work that you need to do. But then it goes on to say, however, if more than one class of works equally describes the construction work for which tenders are invited, then an alternative class of work may also be selected in terms of the subparagraph, but not more than two classes of work may be so selected. So I got a little schematic of one of the public transport interchanges that we are developing in the city. So you can see lots of civil work, paving, roads, there's buses. So it's sort of heavy civil work, lots of layer works, etc., but also a fair bit of building works. These PTIs have got often have offices for associations, etc. There's some retail involved there. And our experiences with the tenders that we've put out in that instance, that it's very, very close to a 50-50 split between CE and GB. So the example that we stated here is copied from one of our projects, which just says a project in total value of 300 million rand. It contains equal values of building and civil works. The designation would be advertised as 9GB or 9CE. And what that means is you can bid as a CE and meet the criteria, or you can bid as a GB and meet the criteria. You're obviously going to subcontract that which you're not the specialist in, you're going to subcontract out. The crux here is always what does equal mean? And I think to the discussion we had last week, and with Richard's help, it's going to depend on you what you think equal means. I think at base value, and one of our former legal colleagues that we worked with, he was very adamant equal is 50-50. 51-49 to him wasn't equal. But again, to Richard's point earlier, there needs to be some flexibility, and that to an extent is why they would have used the word equal in the regs, to say that, okay, so this PTI that we've got the picture on here, maybe it's 48% civil works and 52% building works. Maybe by my former colleagues' definition, that wouldn't be equal. But again, you're being irrational by saying, well, for that sort of small small gap between the two. I'm going to do it as a civil project only, and I'm going to exclude the GBs, or vice versa. So again, you need to apply your mind to the realities of your specific construction project. If it is in that range around the 50-50, 55-45, that kind of a range, even 60-40, I suppose you can push it to. It's a large project. You don't have a heck of a lot of 9 GBs or CEs that work in your space. It may be prudent, and based on the risk analysis of soliciting the broadest section of offers, to advertise as 9 GB or 9 CE. Please note, no more than 2 classes. It's not the intent here that if you have, remember those examples we shared earlier about the 20-story building, and there's some piling and there's some all sorts of other specialist work, that we want to say this is a 9 GB, a 2 SI, a 3 ME. No. It's only one value designation. So everything has to be a 9, and you get the choice between 2 works classes only. All right. That is how we select the designation for the bids. In terms of our tender document, it's based on an estimate, and it's based on that estimate that we go through and select the value range and the works category. Just turning to how we evaluate the tenders now, just something that we thought we would share, because quite often there's a bit of confusion in terms of how do we evaluate this tender. I've now asked for a 6 CE. I get a bid back from a 5 CE. So now, is he responsible or non-responsible? Because I asked for a 6 CE. So we need to turn to the wording that we find in the standards for uniformity and the principles contained in the CIDB structure. The moment you have advertised at the 6 CE, that's its purpose fulfilled. It's an indication to the market of where you think the estimate of the project lies. That's its task is done. It has no further role to play in your evaluation with lump sum tenders. What the wording says, and it's sort of highlighted to you here, is only those tenderers who are registered with the CIDB in a contractor grading designation equal to or higher than the grading designation determined in accordance with the sum tendered. The criticality is about the sum tendered. You as a bidder get evaluated on your CIDB status based on the amount you tendered, never the amount that has been advertised. So just 2 little pop-ups for you. A tenderer can never be non-responsive on the grounds that they have a grading that is lower than which has been advertised. That is the wrong terminology to use. We can't say, I asked for a 6, you are a 5, you are non-responsive. However, he can be non-responsive if he's a 5 and the price he's offered you sits in the grade 6 value range. So your responsiveness test on CIDB would be, or the argument or your statement would be, bidder A is non-responsive because they tendered outside of their tender value range. I hope that doesn't confuse too much. I think we've got a few examples that we'll play with on the next slide. There were also some questions last week about joint ventures and how those need to be determined. And again, in the SFU, there's a whole few bullets on how it all works. CIDB also has an active joint venture calculator on their website. Not sure if it is operational at this stage. I know there were some bugs with it a year or 2 ago. I've always just found it easier to go plug the numbers into the calculator rather than to try and interpret how all of this stuff, what all of this says. These are some rules, but I think the calculator will help you put the rules in together. You wouldn't be able to load a contractor as a lead that's not at least only one level lower, kind of a thing. So please, when you are dealing with the determination of the CIDB grading for joint ventures, please go and utilize the JV calculator on the CIDB website. So let's play around with a few examples. A tender offer is received from a 4 CE bidder in an amount of 5 million bucks for a tender advertised as 4 CE. Quite clearly, 5 million rand sits in the 4. We're happy that he is responsive. I hope everyone sees that. Our next example, a tender offer received from a 4 GB. Oh, the GB in this CE is incorrect. Please apologize. No, hang on, it's right. It's right. Tender offer received from a 4 GB in an amount of 5 million for a tender advertised as 4 CE. So let's look at the value number. 5 million sits, it sits in the grade 4. Happy with that. So on the value range, responsive. However, we advertised as a CE. The bidder is a GE, non-responsive, or not being the correct works category designation. Happy. Tender offer is received from a 4 CE in an amount of 8 million for a tender advertised as 5 CE. Okay, so this guy's bid is 8 million. He's a 4 CE. He bid 8 million. Quite clearly, that 8 million sits in the grade 5 category. We should only be considering him to bid up to 6 million. That bidder is non-responsive for tendering outside its value range. Please, that's sort of what I tried to explain in the preceding slide. It's not about where we advertised it. It's he went outside of his lane. His lane is you must stop at 6 million. He's offered us a price at 8 million rand, which is well outside of his tender value range. But there's a but. Okay. A tender offer for CE in the amount of 5.99 million for a tender advertised as 5 CE. Okay, so 5.99 million, so he's within his value range. We have advertised it as a 5. Our estimate may have been 9 million rand. So we've advertised as a 5. His tender is 5.99. I hope you all see that he remains responsive because he has not tendered outside of his tender value range, as compared to the preceding guy who tendered outside of his value range. The fact that our estimate is 9 and his price is 5.99, that is a completely separate evaluation step in terms of price sustainability and risk analysis. But in terms of the rules of the tendering process, that this bidder remains responsive because he did nothing wrong. In terms of the CIDB rules, you're only non-responsive if you tender outside of your value range. Okay, here comes the but. So you all recall the regulation that we spoke about earlier about if your tender value range is if your tender estimate is within the first 20% of a new value range, you must advertise at the preceding value range. It would therefore be very unfair that if we then exclude guys from tendering into a new value range. So what this regulation of CIDB says, you are an organ of state, may. So it's a discretionary allowance towards us. We may evaluate a tender outside of his value range, a tenderer who tendered outside of his value range, provided the margin is reasonable and that the award of the contract does not pose undue risk. So what would be reasonable? I haven't checked the practice note, apologies, I still wanted to do that. There was a practice note that CIDB published that talked to the reason what would be the reasonable margin. And if I recall, that practice note said if a guy is within the first 15% of a new value range, that could be argued to be reasonable, but 20% would be argued to be unreasonable. We always found that a little bit amusing, saying that on the one hand, we're saying you must advertise that first 20%, you must advertise as a preceding value range, but then we're saying, well, up to 20% would be unreasonable. So we've always took the view that we'll look at that first 20% into a new value range. We will look at it, but we will most certainly subject that tender recommendation under significant risk review from financial ability, etc. Remember, it's not a must. You may do that, and it's all about what you're saying in your SCM, in your policy. So if your policy, I believe your policy, you're entitled to say we're not going to follow this requirement, or you give yourself that enabling provision that you can do that. So let's play with this one quickly. Last bullet on my slides. A tender offer received from a 4 CE bidder is in the amount of $7 million. So 4 CE goes up to 6 million. His bid is in $7 million. So the alarm bells are going off. Okay, he's outside of his tender value range. But that's actually, yeah, it's still within that 15-20% kind of a ratio, kind of a reach into the next category. So our bullet here says you may consider that one, that submission in terms of this regulation, but always remember the additional risk analysis and review that you need to go into. That is me, Sean. Sorry, it took a bit longer than I thought it would, but yeah, I'll remain online for questions, etc.
Well done, and well done. Yeah, please keep the slides on. I've just posted Arno's presentation in the chat. There were some great questions that came through.
Okay, let's go.
If it's okay, let's just run through a couple of those. So Oral Ndorvo says, what happens if I incorrectly estimate the value range up front? Do I then have to cancel the tender and re-advertise?
Yeah, the short answer is it depends. It depends by how much your boo-boo is. So my understanding of how that's also where the criticality comes in, that you must have your projects registered on the CIDB's iTender website. Because when you register on the iTender website, they prompt the suppliers at the grade that you've advertised, at the grade below that you've advertised, and at the grade above which you've advertised it. So the market will know that there is something out there beyond where you've estimated. If, for instance, you've estimated at a 4, and all of the prices come in at a 9, I would be concerned about that kind of a process, or that kind of tendering process, because you may not, by picking your value so low, it may be that those at the 8s and the 9s weren't interested in the work. So you're excluding potential bidders from the work. Remember, again, we're not evaluating against what we advertised. We're evaluating at the value range you tendered. My concern there would then rather doesn't sit in a CIDB prescript. It sits in the fairness and the competitiveness of your tendering process, and not reaching the right bidders. That's not the reality at the moment. We're getting 8s and 9s that are tendering in 3s and 4s value ranges, which is a problem all on its own. The market is hungry. People are out there looking for work. So you may get lucky in that. If I want to salvage a tender like that, that's now all of a sudden in the 8s, I'm going to immediately look at who are the players, who are the 8s and the 9s that play in my market, and did I get a fair cross section of those guys tendering? That could be a wobbly leg that you may want to base an argument on. So as a QS, I'm always ranting about estimating. For me, the estimate upon which you must base your CIDB grading requirements in your tender document must be the estimate based on the price bill of quantities of that which you're taking to market. It shouldn't be an estimate that's a year old. It shouldn't be the estimate that you did a detailed design. You need to conclude your BOQ. You need to price that at today's rates, and that's the number you need to utilize in your tender. We get it a lot where we don't estimate the price bill, and there's either been scope change or escalation has gone crazy, and all of a sudden we do advertise at the wrong level. Hopefully not catastrophically so. I hope that answers it, Sean.
Okay, good one. Kutsa Ratebe says that grade 1 limit is 500,000. I haven't checked that.
I think he's correct. I am bemused about this table that came out of from the CIDB. Yeah, it came from I can't recall where it came from, and I did go look for something more appropriate. and
Yeah.
couldn't find it yet. So, yeah, colleagues, I think just be very mindful of this table. Rather, in the standards for uniformity, there's also a grading table in there, and that would be the one that you apply, which does go from 1.
Okay, good, good. And Willie asks, if you're unsure of which grade applies EB or EP, for example, can you use one and have the other as an alternate? And I think you did answer that, but maybe just go back to that slide.
Yeah, I think about it. It depends on what
Unsure,
you mean by,
EB or EP.
yeah, why are we unsure? I think that's sort of the test that we would want to go through. It would I would battle to understand where that, I mean, why there would be uncertainty in that regard. So, because for me, this is a very clear picture all the way to where my building connects into the municipal system. That's EP all the way up to that point, and from that point downstream, from that connection point, my electrical engineering colleague told me I must use the term point of supply. So point of supply is the battery limits, point of supply to site. From the point of supply onto the site would be EB. Everything upstream of that would be EP. So need to be clear. It could well be, I'm not electrically minded. It could well be that there are some curveballs in all of that. So there's nothing precluding you from doing that, but just again apply the regulation which says if there are equal components that sits in different works categories, you can do the alternate.
Right, right. I'm just going to jump ahead. Nokatulo asks, are solar PV installations classified by CIDB?
They're not. It's something that I would imagine that they are doing a lot of work on CIDB. So what we must give them credit for is that they are always keeping an eye out for new technologies and things that fit into that space, and then they'll always try and incorporate those things by examples. The PV installations kind of thing, I think we would probably rather test that in what we did last week, and my gut feel with the PV installation, it's going to be a substantially supply contract and therefore not necessarily being procured as a construction works project.
Yeah, yeah, good. Let's jump to Walter. Walter's raised his hands. He might have a clarification point on these two questions. Hi, Walter. Welcome. Go ahead, Walter. There we are. Yes, you've unmuted.
Yes. Good morning, colleagues, and thanks, Sean, for the opportunity. I'm Walter from SMU, Sefako Mahato Health Sciences University. In the recent past, we had a session facilitated by CIDB for our built environment and SCM officials within the university. And one bone of a contention was the issue relating to using two different classes of work grading on one tender. And they said to us that is prohibited. You need to identify the correct class. And now listening to the reason provided, it contradicts what has been provided by CIDB. Maybe what I would really request, because we just had a project now for building of a boundary wall, and we then identified two different classes, and there was a debate around the instruction that we got from CIDB when they were providing a training. And some colleagues had a view, obviously it's almost similar to what is being presented today, but we then made a reference to the training manual, and it was clear that they even made an example of Hartsebande College or Tibet College to say this is prohibited, and they mentioned that they had two different classes of work in one bid and say you can either have this or that, and they said this is prohibited by the board. So maybe what can also assist, Sean, maybe is to find out if there is an instruction note or circular that has been issued to clarify that. Maybe that would be able to assist us, because it's one area that we've been debating about and we've got no clear solution on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Walter.
So
Arno,
again,
there often just kind of misunderstandings on class and grade.
there's often a misunderstanding about the interpretation and application of the CIDB's Act and regulations, and that's what concerns me a lot more, Sean. Obviously, there could be devil in the detail in terms of the example that Walter had used. I heard him say about fencing and walling, and I think that's where it gets important that you go and have a look at that practice note 20. So it could well be that it was a predominantly brickwork kind of a wall, and then that practice note says, based on those definitions, that it's materials that come onto site for the construction rather than precast elements arriving for erection, that it then should be GB. Colleagues, we said it last week also. You need to. CIDB is an incredibly important role player in our determination and our methodologies of how we procure. But it remains your responsibility. It remains each of our responsibilities to read the Act, to apply the Act, and apply the regulations. We have not had that feedback at all. We are constantly advertising alternative classes based on the Act. I think we're quite sort of ruthless in terms of how we determine equal. We've got quite a hard stance in that regard. But until such time as the Act and the regulations are changed, you can apply the regulations as far as I'm concerned. Again, under the caveat of we don't know what all the details were in the specific project that CIDB reviewed for Walter.
Thanks. So, Michael, before I bring you in, I'm just going to put Oral's second question. If within the market, there are no service providers graded up to 9 for road marking, as an example, which is quite difficult for contractors to reach that grading, does that force the procuring organization to reduce the grading range in order for a tender to be competitive? And does that not come with a negative impact?
Sure. It does become a little bit tricky. Obviously, if you're able to reduce your projects, that's an easy fix. Within the risks of that, it may not then become sort of becomes a little bit ridiculous, etc. You need to engage. I think you need to do your market research again, as we explained last week. Do your market research, see who the market players are. If it is abundantly clear based on a rational market research process that you don't have any grade 9s, go check out the CIDB register of contractors. There are no grade 9s, or there's only 2 grade 9s, etc. I would then say, well, here's a procurement risk for me based on the application of the register of contractors. CIDB, can you help me? Do you appreciate that there's a problem here? Are there perhaps role players that we're not aware of? And again, I think at that point, it might start coming to a point where you can then start applying that, considering offers from people into the next value range, as long as it's reasonable. And in that instance, the reasonability may have a very different slant to it. If there just aren't players in the market that you're targeting at that value, it may mean that your evaluation of reasonable will have to be a little bit less robust than if you had a lot of market players. That would be my only canvas, and keep that potential risk in mind very early on. You don't want to become aware of that when your tenders are closed. You want to know right up front or very early on, oh, hang on, this tender is so big on the road marking front, none of our local suppliers, none of our provincial suppliers will be able to meet it. It's starting to become a procurement risk, and then have that engagement with CIDB a lot sooner to get you some sort of additional support to the risk-based decision that you're going to make one way or the other.
Right. Michael, you raised your hand about 3 questions ago. Welcome, Michael. Thank you.
Sorry, I think what we need to look at, and we seem to be losing sight of, is the context of the regulations as regards to grading and category of grade of speciality. They were originally intended to provide guidelines as to the capacity of a contractor to complete a project of a certain value and in a certain category of work. That was the original intention of the regulations. They were certainly not in, the intention was certainly not to be excessively restrictive, which is what they seem to have become nowadays. There are other statutory regulations which determine what type of work certain contractors can perform. In other words, electrical works can only be undertaken by a registered electrical contractor who has registered electricians in its employ. The question that remains is whether an electrical contractor with registered electricians should be limited to performing work either in EB or in EP category, irrespective of whether they're registered in either of the two categories with the CIDB. And one must be very careful because I think I did mention it before, the CIDB has certain limitations, and the application of these regulations must be seen within those limitations. That's my view. And I think if I was an electrical contractor and I would debarred from bidding on a category of work because I'm not registered, I would certainly feel aggrieved, and I would certainly take up the matter legally. I would certainly challenge my exclusion. And I think probably that there are a myriad of other acts and regulations through the Competition Commission, through the Constitution itself, that one would be able to rely on to actually find or probably obtain a ruling that the exclusion is actually contrary to a number of existing acts and regulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I think as we alluded last week to your similar question, this is around procurement. We acknowledge all of the other acts and bits and pieces. I would be very excited to see where the court takes us if people start challenging these outcomes, just from an interest point of view. However, what you need to bear in mind is that we as state-owned entities are being held accountable to these regulations. CIDB publishes their own compliance monitor. We recently received a naughty boy letter from CIDB about certain tenders that we put to market, which were perceived not to have been procured in terms of these very CIDB gradings and works categories. We are audited against these things every single year. So your point is well taken. I think I have appreciation for the fact, however, that within a compliance environment of which we operate, this is the benchmark against which our procurement decisions are measured. So yeah, there is other legislation. As I say, we acknowledge that, but these are the measures that we need to comply with from a procurement compliance point of view.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I'll just go back to something that was discussed with Sean, that South Africa needs to have a global look. Where at the moment we're operating in silos. We need to have a global look at procurement and saying, you know, what is the dominant legislation that applies, other than Section 217 of the Constitution, and filter it down from there, which at the moment isn't happening. And that's why every now and then people who are at the wit's end resort to court, and then the court actually declares a whole host of regulations unconstitutional, invalid, and it actually sets everybody and everything back by years, rather than actually starting to do the job properly from the start.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Bigger picture problems.
Good one. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Arno. Benti, do you want to just explain that exemption that you posted?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. It's informative. It deals with the construction regulations, which refer to CIDB grading. The construction regulations have been written as if every single construction project in the country requires a construction work permit, that is exemption number 4 that you see. I've uploaded it, and it applies to grades 7, 8, and 9 only. So any project in those 7, 8, and 9 grades do need a construction work permit. The others are conditionally exempted. It's just informative. It's a one-pager. It's published in the Government Gazette. It might change, but please take note that the CIDB gradings are referenced by the construction regulations as well. Thank you.
Agreed. Those exemptions also state number of man hours and etc., specifically to deal with all construction work in terms of the construction regs, even if it's not being procured as construction. So yeah, it's a value-based decision. So absolutely, it is important, but I think they also went with those man hours requirements to cover the entire spectrum, because again, you may end up not having to procure it as construction based on the CIDB Act, but it remains construction in terms of the construction regs. It would have been awesome if everything was aligned. Alas, it's not. So from a practitioner point of view and a contract execution or contract manager, it is important to know that even though, I think, thanks for raising it, and just to reiterate, even though you may have procured something not as construction, your responsibilities in terms of the construction regulations are different. So even something which may be substantially labor or substantially supply and does not be procured through the CIDB system, you will still need to comply with the construction regulations when you take that work to site.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you both. Freddie is asking the question. Kutso has put a response as well there. When we say tendering outside of their grade level, are we saying that, for example, if a tender is of grade 4, which is 6 million, and we receive proposals of tenders of grade 8, are we disqualifying them as they outside of their grade, or what?
No, it's on the upside. It's only on the upside, outside of your range on the upside. So a 9 can tender in any of the value ranges on the downside.
So it's not the grade, it's, as you said, it's the value.
Yeah.
Kutso saying it's tricky, the 5.99 million, they make them below the estimate market range. They may win the bid as lowest price and not complete the project. At what point would they not make it through due to this risk?
So obviously, in that the whole pricing risk thing is something that's it comes from a long time ago. If you all recall, in 2005, 2006, Treasury issued that press statement, practice note kind of a thing that said deviation from a pre-tender estimate or deviation from the average of a tender is not the grounds upon which you may make a bidder non-responsive. So that 5.99 against an estimate of 8 million rand, the alarm bells are going off in my head when I get that tender to evaluate. Is he responsive in terms of his CIDB duties? Absolutely. Can he do the work? Got nothing to do with his CIDB grading. I now need to go and dig into that in terms of whether it is reasonable, whether he can actually do the work. So price testing, but you need to do that. You need to do that price testing even for a guy within a value range. We all need to be appreciative that as the value ranges go up the ladder, the spacing in those ranges become quite large, and you may get a guy. And bearing in mind, to get into a range, you've only done 30% of the value to get into that range. So the price risk and the price sustainability test is something that you do all the time anyway. But yes, the alarm bells will go off with that guy that's very, very low, very, very far below your estimate. And you will do that under market analysis of his pricing.
Probably's got a 3-line question, which is quite a big one. Does CIDB differentiate or define ad hoc provisional sums, contingencies to add to BOQ? You want to tackle that?
Yeah, so it's at one stage. I mean, obviously, a provisional sum and a contingency, depending on how your document is structured, is part of your tender sum. So the regulation refers to the tender sum. So if the tender sum has got a specific value range, if your estimate includes contingencies and and provisional sums, that's the totality of your estimate. It's the totality of the price that he tendered. You need to include that. There was at one stage a document from CIDB which I haven't been able to find again, where they cautioned against, for instance, including contingencies into a tender sum, saying, the contingency is a risk mitigation measure for a client. You shouldn't necessarily attach it to a contract sum. From a practical point of view, in my younger days working for a contractor, a site queue is for a contractor. One of my tasks was to relieve my clients of their contingency allowances, and I was exceptionally good at that. So it's something you must again that'll be an organizational decision whether you want to include it or not, bearing in mind that excluding it places you in that position where you might actually be exposing a contractor to a price risk that he's not ready for, especially when it's those threshold tenders, etc. Certainly, our process is that we include contingencies. In our SCM policy, we've got a cap at the value of provisional sums that we are allowed in any single tender, because for us a provisional sum is a undetailed item which comes with pricing risk. So we've got a specific cap, quite a low cap in what provisional sums need to be, but they are included. What we don't include, as a matter of course, in the tender sums or any contract price adjustment allowances. We keep that out of the contract realm. That's a separate budgetary process that we follow. So I hope that clarifies.
Branch, you probably want to add something to this provisional sums contingencies discussion?
Yes, indeed. It's my sentiment, and those of many others that I follow and learn from, that contingencies is a budget item. It is something that is the client's money. It is the client's prerogative to apply that. So it should not be put into a tender document. It's the client's money. If the consulting team, the quantity surveyor in his estimates for the client to have budgets approved always includes a contingency, but that contingency remains the client's and is at his discretion. So the consulting team can't just spend that money. Some of them do get a delegated authority or a mandate to exceed a budget by a certain value, obviously pre-approved before they're allowed to spend that, but contingency should ideally be left outside of tender documents. There was also a court case some years ago where the contingency allowance that the client included was allocated, actually awarded to the contractor. And it was for work that it never did. So it was negligence, and the consultants was held responsible. The PI, professional indemnity, was taken for that. But that set a precedent that if you don't word whatever allowances you include, if you don't word it thoroughly and properly and make sure that you cover yourselves, rather leave contingencies out of the tender document. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. There's a big part of agreement with you on that, Frans. But I mean, sometimes that's a business decision that goes a bit broader. To your point about the control of it, absolutely, it's something that has changed a lot in terms of the mandate for consultants and how contingency can be spent and the management of that. We've certainly turned the screw on that quite substantially. But again, I think it's a discussion. Everybody have your discussion in your organs, in your businesses. There's arguments both ways. There was a part at one point when we had this discussion a couple of years ago where I was arguing for the position that you took in France, but then there were some other business requirements and some other reporting requirements, etc., which overall the business made the decision that we will allow the 5 or the 10% contingency to form part of the contract sum.
Thanks, Arno. Xolani, before we get to you, we're just going to quickly cover Ntombi's question. Is it possible to advertise a tender in different grades, especially if you want to create a panel of suppliers in different gradings, and how can they be evaluated?
Oh, we almost made it through the session without talking about framework tenders. I was really hoping we were going to give that one a miss. Colleagues, yeah, so framework tenders or panels, however you want to designate them, they are messy. They take a lot of specialized thought in it. And at the city, we've gone through quite a spiral in this regard. We did it one way, we were taken to task. We did it in another way, we were taken to court, and now we're back at the way we had done it in the past. So it really is something you guys need to grapple with. There's one section in the CIDB Act where, in that instance, in that section where it talks about how you must determine the grade value at which you advertise, it says something for tenders that are of an ad hoc nature, to be utilized as and when the annualized value of the contract can be used to determine the grading. So yes, and we're currently gone back to a different methodology because the court told us that we misinterpreted the act in that specific regard. You guys can go and read the JK structure, City of Cape Town against JK structures, finding of a year ago or so. Very interesting reading, and it's going to give you both sides of the argument. And again, everybody make up your own decisions. Be sure that you are comfortable in your decision, and then be consistent. So to answer the question, we are currently embarking on quite a few tenders and developing sort of new methodologies where out of a single tender process, we may be getting tenders back from 3, 4s, and 5s, depending, and then the work will be allocated to whoever falls in that works package value range, as we've designated it in contract. But it's probably need 3 times.
It's probably a separate discussion.
It is messy. It comes with quite a few complications, a lot of which we're developing as we go along at the moment, because again, the ruling has put specific emphasis on certain matters. So I think at this stage, Sean, I think the JK structures ruling would probably be the best reading for anyone who wants to get into the minds of how we do panels and frameworks.
But Tolani, you want to ask your question? Welcome.
Thank you, Sean, and good morning to Arno and the colleagues. Thank you for the presentation. A lot of my questions have been clarified as the Q&A session was going on. I just have 4 short questions, short questions. 3
with answers, right?
Yeah, 3 emanating from something Arno had touched on, and my 4th one will just be a question I want to throw out here to hear what will maybe the response be from the colleagues as well as you, Arno. Firstly, in your presentation, when you were starting, you briefly touched on the rigorous procedure that CIDB does to examine the bidder's competency in terms of upgrading them and so forth. Now, we are seeing a big increase in, I will classify them as high CIDB grading service providers submitting fraudulent information as experience. If I say high, I'm ranging them in the 4, CIDB 5, and so forth. So, and when we are requesting experience, they are submitting fraudulent letters, completion certificates, and whatnot, which now leads to the question of how did this person now be able to reach a grade 5 at CIDB and not have proper documentation to support the experience they have. So that is my first one, to say, how is that happening? And 2, coupled with that, something that now we are looking into is a matter of, because whenever we are issuing out a tender for consultants, it's always an issue of the directors also must be showing their professional engineering qualifications. But whenever it's the contractors, that emphasis is never really done to say the one now who's doing the construction of the road must be having some sort of qualification as the director. Nevertheless, there will be a requirement that people who are in the employ have such. And now we are zooming to that stream of thought to say also the contractors, directors must also be having some sort of expertise within the engineering side, because we are seeing a lot of issues on that one. But that's the first one I was touching to say. Now, does maybe CIDB look into that also, the expertise of the one who's showing experience, or they just look at, they have the experience that they've done the work, coupling that.
Can I answer you as you go along? Your questions are not as short as you promised.
Yeah.
No problem. No problem.
And just to be sure, Tolani, Arno is not with CIDB, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was going to be my recommendation, perhaps. Obviously, CIDB's got a code of conduct. Your own institution will have an abuse of policy procedures. If you find fraud, those are the avenues that you need to go through. So contact CIDB, bring these things to their attention. In terms of what quality control is being done, etc., we would need to have that engagement with CIDB. I think it may also be of value to everyone for CIDB to come and explain to us in terms of how does a contractor get their grading designation. I found it fascinating. I completely underestimated what went on. So I think those would be the answer to your issues on CIDB. The issues about qualifications of directors, etc. Again, we need to always be careful or be mindful of the fact that we don't want to start putting restrictive bidding conditions into place. A director of a construction company, in my mind, doesn't need to know how to pour a cubic meter of concrete, but he needs to employ those who can. I think it would start becoming extremely restrictive, especially in the emerging sector. If we're starting to say, for you to, one of the functionality criteria that we're going to test is that the director of the company must be professionally registered or must have 10 years experience, etc. If the company meets your requirements, essentially, so if the company's got 10 years of experience doing the work and can show you that under the same director, by extrapolation, the director's got that experience. So I would caution against that. From a PSP point of view, that is a slightly different angle, but we also need to be mindful of what constitutes the construction market. And very often these are businessmen that start a construction company. A businessman doesn't necessarily need to be fully technically competent to employ technically competent people. So I would caution against that one. So those were two of your questions. What were the others?
Businessman or woman?
Businessman, business person. Apologies. Apologies, everyone.
One more question, Tolani, and then we'll ask Kutso to come in and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, yeah, because of time, I think I'll follow suit on your proposal, Sean. However, that was just one question. I was just coupling it to say it emanated from that one.
Right.
But nevertheless, the shortest of my question was, you touch on the JV story, that the lead contractor must be having a greater CIDB grading and whatnot. Now, when a JV has happened and that JV was awarded, and during the course of the work, they are now having some issues, and then they can no longer perform. What is the best recourse on that one? If they say they can correct their differences speedily and continue with the work, do we have that allowance, or maybe it's a matter of you two got this together, now it's no more immediate disqualification? What maybe on that one would you advise will be the best way forward?
Great question.
Yeah, again, it's a little bit outside of the realm of our topic around the procurement requirements. It becomes a contract management issue, and you need to deal with it in terms of contract, in putting the bidder to terms, trying to negotiate and trying to facilitate the conclusion of the work. Where from a procurement point of view, where you need to be very, very cautious is if a couple of months into the contract, all of a sudden the JV partner upon which this bidder won the tender disappears from your radar, because obviously then that starts offending the granting of preference points, etc.
Yeah.
So our tender documents, part of a contract management portion of our tender documents, is on a monthly basis. You must continue to make the declaration about the participation of the joint venture partners. So on a monthly basis, we test the reality of the joint venture partners' activity in a contract back towards that upon which points were allocated. And we've got some contract management procedures and fines. And if it is something that we find to be dishonesty or fraud, we will deal with that through processes in our SEM policy or through contract.
Good. So you've got the last question. Welcome.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone. Just a quick question. To award a contract to a potentially emerging contractor, you said it's mandatory that the client must have a development program, and if they do not have that, does it? What happens then in terms of the award? Does it make it do not qualify for that, or do they have to redo the process in terms of the bid itself?
Yeah, so again, please can have a look at that practice note. I think it was 32 or 31 or 32 or 33. It is expressed very nicely in that. It's been a minute since I've been in that practice note, because we made certain decisions quite some time ago. But to answer in short, the granting or the award of a contractor within a PE designation, it's again, it's not a right, it's almost like a privilege that you have, and that privilege comes with the price that you pay, and that is to support the contractor. So that's always been our understanding of what the wording in the Act and the reg says, and then it was supported by that practice note. So I would be concerned if you have done that. Again, my recommendation is try and get in touch with your local CIDB office. As a matter of course, ask them to come and consult with you. Obviously, all of the CIDB offices throughout the country, they are passionate about contractor development programs. So it could be a methodology through which you could then pursue that contractor development program. Whether an award that's happened outside of that constitutes audit findings, etc., you need to have that engagement with your legal services or your audit advisory folks. I would need a heck of a lot more detail before I can specifically advise one way or the other on that.
My understanding, the PE, that's a legislative condition. So
that's my worry. That is my worry.
So
it does come out. It's not. Yeah. So colleagues, if I wasn't clear, the practice note was supplementary to what is in the Act or the regs. I can't recall if it's the Act or the regs. So it's not a practice note that's standing on its own with some best practice. It's supporting what is in the Act. So to Sean's point, absolutely, the linkage between the PE designation and the contractor development program, that is in the law. So that's the bit that would concern me for you.
Arno, massive thanks once again. And
very welcome.
Thank you. I have included Arno's presentation in the chat. Welcome to send me an email if you want me to email that to you. It's only 2 megabytes. And I think we might want to have at some point in the future, we've got the next couple of weeks lined up, but some point in the future on a bit more of a detailed discussion around the frameworks. Frameworks in the space, because it is not easy.
Yeah, for that discussion, I would love to collaborate with the CIDB teams, maybe a Richard or those guys who've got the experience of doing that, because and then we can share the bit of a hospital pass that we found ourselves in, and the quandary that we found ourselves in. It's interesting. If the changes in procurement principles is what floats your boat like it does ours, is very, very interesting. My colleagues who must implement construction works, far less interesting, more catastrophic to them.
Well done, Arno. Thank you. And we're certainly going to look at that court case. Next week, we have the procurement reform workshop, which is underway. And we're going to be joining online that particular workshop next week. And the week after that, Benti is going to take us through the construction GCC and looking forward to that one. So that would, if I'm not mistaken, I hope that's still going to be okay, Benty, that that'll be the 31st of July. And then I think we've got something on the cost containment the week after that. So a couple of good sessions lined up, everybody. Huge thanks again, Arno. We'll get the recording onto the YouTube channel. And by the looks of things, the last YouTube channel has certainly taken, the last YouTube video that we posted of you, Arno, has got a lot of interest and is getting lots of views. So thanks very much. Well done to you again.
Can I finally say I'm trending somewhere?
You are trending. You certainly are.
Hey, for me.
Well done. Well done. You got to tell any children that you're working with that you're trending on YouTube. They'd be impressed.
Yeah, I would just need to find a way to find it first. That's the embarrassing bit.
Look for Arno Barnard.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for watching.
Good one. Well done.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.